All right, everybody. Well, welcome to another episode of Red Grace Live. My name is Emilio Ramos. As always, I am joined by producer Michael Whitehead. Micah, it's great
Heyo.
to see you, brother. How are you?
It's been a week, but I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to have this conversation because I think it's an important one that we often kind of overlook. We don't get too deep into it because might not necessarily be our sin that we're dealing with, or it might
Yeah.
be the sin that we're dealing with. So it's going to be a good conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And I was talking to you just a moment ago about the Twitter icon that you're still using. And I
Amen.
told you that you need to update that thing. We're no longer dealing with little blue birds. Now we're dealing with black X's and stuff like that. What is Elon Musk doing with the letter
God,
X?
yeah, God
X
bless
is taking
him.
over.
Yeah, it's just a long dream of his to take over the world with this X company, this X idea that he's been working on for many years, many. Uh, I guess even
Mhm.
before I guess Tesla and all that kind of stuff. So we'll see. It's more of a
Yeah, that's right.
PayPal dream of his.
Yeah, I hear that this X initiative is kind of like a everything app. He
That's exactly
envisions a
right.
world in which you do everything through X.
Right.
You pay through X, you buy through X, you sell through X. Everything on your social media or
Could this
videos or
be the
everything will
mark
be
of the
through X.
beast?
Yeah, it's kind of eerie, isn't it? Matter of fact, my wife and I were having dinner with a couple friends here last couple days ago, and
Hmm.
we walked by a Tesla store. You know, they have the storefronts here and
Yep,
there, and they have a Tesla storefront here in Plano, Texas. And guess what's now at the very middle of that store? I don't know if you've seen it yet, but
I
right in
have
the
not.
middle, up front by the glass, now there is the Tesla humanoid robot on
Oh, they have
display,
one. Oh, I'm gonna have to go check
getting
that
you,
out.
yeah, getting you ready for your own personal oracle that will follow you around
Yeah.
and help you decipher everything. It's like first they got us ready with Siri and Alexa and these smart, speakers, but we're getting ready to go into a post-human world.
Yeah, I mean, my iPhone is always here, but like the Alexa, I don't know why I've drawn a line at cannot have Alexa in my home. Even
That's
though,
right.
this guy right here is recording every single word that I say and sending
Yeah,
it back to Steve Jobs in
yeah,
some,
yeah. You
you know,
are a digital chauvinist. That's what you are.
that's exactly right. Absolutely.
Actually, what we're talking about right now with Tesla and and X and humanoids and robots and everything, not altogether separate for what we're going to be discussing today in Romans chapter 1, which
Yeah,
is amazing. So let me have the first word and then we'll dive right in.
sounds good.
Well, Romans chapter 1 is a very, very important passage of scripture for a number of things. Obviously, for our theology. And Romans chapter 1 is critical because it sets forth the sin of mankind as even it begins to open the whole section there on basically the paganism of man who exchanges the glory of God. And it begins in verse 18 with the suppression of God's truth, even as the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. And then it goes into a sort of a detailed exposition of a threefold sort of exchange and a giving over of of man to their devices by God. But obviously, Romans 1 tells us first and foremost that in the exchange of the glory of God for that of the creation, that is the sin of paganism. And in paganism, mankind rejects the creator creature relationship and he rejects the creator creature distinction and ending up in some sort of pantheistic or pagan or some sort of mutualistic relationship between the divine and the creation. And of course, that's the very essence of paganism, is to worship something that God made in place of God. I mean, it's also idolatry. And so what happens in Romans is that there's a logical progression, maybe even more accurate. There is a descent into that, that road of depravity and that spiral of depravity of mankind. What happens when people reject their creator God? And of course, it begins with the whole notion of paganism, but it also moves to the issue of hedonism. And I think probably above everything, when we think about Romans 1, we use Romans 1 specifically because we know, well, there is a very clear refutation and the basis of the apologetics with which we can tackle things like homosexuality. And so Romans 1 deals with homosexuality for sure, but even more generally, we go from paganism, and we can say from paganism, we move over to hedonism, where there is this sort of unbridled pursuit of hedonistic pleasure and hedonistic immorality. And then a lot of times we sort of leave the vice list there. But I'd like to focus on something that I think is affecting our culture right now as we continue that logical progression, that logical descent, where we're not just looking at paganism, we're not just looking at hedonism, but what comes after hedonism, we can say, is the total unraveling of a society, of a nation, of even of an individual that goes down the path of just a pagan spirituality and a pagan lifestyle, where there's nothing stopping you once you've exchanged the truth of God for the lie, as Romans 1:25 says. There's really nothing stopping people from going headlong into the very things that Romans 1 is talking about, with that extended vice list, as we see mankind becoming unloving and becoming unfeeling and disrespectful to authority and parents and just everything else that comes with a sinful culture that has exchanged the glory of God. But one of the things that Romans says is that there is a barbarity, there is a heartlessness about a culture that exchanges the glory of God. And it is that barbarity that is the next step, so that we go from paganism to hedonism. And if we're not careful as a society, and so many societies can attest to this very fact, and we'll talk about that, but the next stop for a culture that does not heed the warning signs of the wrath of God is that God gives them over to barbarity. And we're going to actually show a video today that I thought was indicative of that, illustrative of that, and is a very sad metaphor, a very sad example of the fact that our culture in many places in this nation, and of course extending outwardly to the rest of the world, where we live in a very barbaric time. And we'll talk about the different aspects of that and how that manifests itself in society. But we're going to break down how Romans continues beyond talking about homosexuality all the way as society descends into barbarity. And so it's there's some very critical texts that we'll get, we'll look at as we talk about those things. So let's get into the details of Romans 1 and how it reflects upon our culture.
So Emilio, like, why does the church stop really at just the sexual sin of Romans 1? That's kind of where we spend all of our time, which is a very cultural aspect of what's going on with how whenever we open up the Word of God and we read the words, and then we do a very dispensational thing, which is we read the Bible and then we have our newspaper, and we kind of mesh the two a lot of times. But I think it's true within the Reformed Church as well. Why do we typically just stop at the sexual sin? Why don't we go any further into the hedonism and reflect on that and where our culture is today?
And the barbarism.
And the barbarism, that's correct.
Barbarism is not really, can you imagine walking into a church and your sermon for the day is barbarism 101. Typically we don't talk about
the 1700s. What's going on?
Right, exactly. But looking around at what's going on in Western civilization, the disillusionment of Western civilization, right, and what's happening culturally, particularly, I mean, I know you would agree with this, Micah, but man, in some of America's most populated cities, I mean, we're talking about New York, we're talking about San Francisco, we're talking about LA, we're talking about Chicago and Dallas and other places. Man, you really are starting to see cities, metropolises that are just not even safe to live in anymore.
Right. Absolutely.
And I mean, we could sit here for the rest of this episode and just play video after video after video of crimes that are being committed in these cities that are just blow your mind. I mean, just mind-boggling kind of stuff, It's like one Cops episode after another. I mean, our cities are really descending into chaos in many ways. And we hope that something happens. We hope, I think as a church, as believers, we hope that God will, in his sovereignty and in his mercy, we hope that maybe something politically will happen that will sort of change the direction of this country. But as it stands, it seems like places like California and Los Angeles, San Francisco, these places, they're just moving at breakneck speed and they're heading right over a cliff. And it just doesn't seem like anybody has enough logic and reason to stop the train. So it's really wild, but I think you're right on the money, Mike. I think that for obvious reasons, the church has had to combat things that are going on in the culture that force us to do an apologetics out of Romans chapter 1, where we focus in on the sin of, let's say, homosexuality and basically immorality, all over the place. But we focus in on that sin because we think, well, this is such a pivotal issue. Right. It really shows you that in the wrath of God, there is a very sad but logical progression to what happens to a society that has been given over by God to the wrath of God. And if there is no repentance, if God doesn't ordain revival for that place, they can go right into the rest of what Romans chapter... matter of fact, let me read this, Micah, sure, if you don't mind. I'll read Romans chapter 1, and we'll move on from verse 28. I'll just kind of read towards the end of the chapter. That's Romans chapter 1, verse 28, going all the way to the end here. This is what the Apostle Paul says. He says, "And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness and wickedness, greed, evil." It's almost like, how much further do you really want to go from that point? But he does. He actually expounds on that, elaborates on that. Full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving. And here's a word that I want to, this is kind of the word that really makes us focus on this idea of barbarity or barbarism, is the word unmerciful. We're living in a world that, given over by God, becomes unmerciful. And verse 32, "And although they know the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death," that's how severe, that's how serious the sin is, but they don't care. They don't only do the same, but they give hearty approval to those who practice them. And so, Micah, this shows us that for the Apostle Paul, he sees that a society that has exchanged the glory of God, you have begun to honor the Creator and the creature more than the creation and the creature more than the Creator,
right,
who is blessed forever. That they start going down a path that leads to total anarchy. I mean, what else are you going to call this vice list in Romans? I mean, this is total anarchy. This is the right, idolatrous, murderous heart of man, depraved heart of man, put on full display for everyone to see, that if God does not become your Lord, your Savior, your Redeemer, this is the kind of society you're going to be left with And that's a very, very dark place to live. And obviously, we believe in the influence of the witness of the church and evangelism and missions, and we believe in the, if you would, the effect that we have on this culture because of we are the light of the world, and
Right.
that we are to be the salt of the earth, and that we are to, spread the knowledge of God everywhere, in the hope that people would obviously repent and believe, but as God grants repentance, we hope that society will benefit at some general level, will benefit from moral standards and just biblical reason and truth and logic and common sense. And but when you have a society that's hell bent on turning their back against God, I mean, just as Paul goes on to say here, there is no limit to which that society will go. So,
well, I
that's
hate
what we're looking at.
Yeah, I hate to bait you here, but aren't we living in the golden age right now? Aren't we all things getting better for the return of Christ?
Oh, you want to get me in trouble is what you want. Fair enough. I mean, we did just do the episode on theonomy with Lane Tipton, and so
Right.
I know that there are the postmillennial crowd will not agree and will disagree, and the theonomy crowd will not agree. But yeah, I mean, this is one of the reasons why when people get initially get exposed to something like the postmillennial hope, you start encountering this sort of resistance from others that say, wait a minute, just look around. Does it look like we're heading into a golden age? And what they would respond, and how they would respond to that, is they would say, obviously, God throughout all of history is going to ordain peaks and valleys. There'll be temporary victories, temporary setbacks. We're going to see the rising and falling of nations like we always have throughout all church history. And at times, Christians may see terrible persecution, but that does not preclude the idea that ultimately, in the end, in the final analysis, God will give his people victory over this present world and over this sinful humanity. But there's some real challenges to that now. I think now, Micah, in our generation, even more so than in previous generations, because now we have, with the advent of technological advancements, and as we're heading towards much more of a globalist, transhumanist, a technological singularity kind of vision, I don't know where this golden age is going to hurl from.
Right.
Well, I don't know where it's gonna come from.
Well, just from everything that you were just saying, is like, why didn't Paul figure this out? And then why did he write to the Romans that it's just going to get bad unless we put our hope and faith in Jesus Christ? How did he miss this? Except for the fact that maybe it's not biblical, or maybe it's not the revealed will of God.
Yeah, no, as a matter of fact, I've made an argument. Remember when we did the last gospel episode? For those that want to look into that, just look on the YouTube channel for the last gospel. I made an argument that I just kind of was studying Revelation, and I was looking at Revelation chapter 13, where John is talking about the threefold angels that descend out of heaven, and they bring their angelic messages, and one of them has what John calls the everlasting gospel. And that gospel is the gospel of the creator and the creature, and trying to restore people back to a basic understanding of creation. There is a creator that made everything. You should fear him. It's amazing. And actually, it was G.K. Beale who kind of confirmed what I was thinking about in that passage. And he showed how in Acts chapter 14 and Acts chapter 17, you see the same phenomenon in Acts within a really pagan world. When you think about the Athenians, and when you think about the Apostle Paul in other pagan cities, you start realizing that he did the same thing that John did. He had to tell them about the Creator and about how God created the earth and the heavens and the springs of water and those kinds of things, because paganism and idolatry, Greco-Roman idolatry or modern idolatry, literally needs to be reintroduced to a worldview. They need to be reintroduced to cosmology. But here's the thing, Micah, in all those passages, what G.K. Beale pointed out, which I thought was so insightful, that just like in Athens and in other places in the book of Acts, the book of Revelation anticipates that mankind will not repent.
Yeah. Never bend the knee.
And that of course that then incurs the final wrath of God, the final judgment of God on a sinful planet. And so, yeah, man,
we're going way off.
Age coming, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, we're going way off topic, but essentially,
a little bit.
If Christ returns with wrath first, why would he be delivering wrath to a world that has been conquered by the church?
Yeah, no, precisely. It's a fair question. I mean, because we are talking about, does Romans 1 affect our world right now? Is Romans 1 and the wrath of God that we're seeing in Romans 1, is that descriptive only of the Greco-Roman world of the first century?
Right. Was it only to the Roman audience that he wrote to? Or is it applicable for us today?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think you want to argue that.
Yeah.
Because no matter what you say, even after Constantine attempted to, in a carnal way, Christianize the empire, which was absolutely carnal. Just read any church history book. He took the pagan priests from pagan temples, and he basically bestowed on them a new religion in this sort of synthetic form of Christianity, where people were basically purchasing their rights to be Christian priests and those kind of things in the Roman Empire. I mean, just completely scandalous. So it didn't result in a golden age then. And what I would just say is that I think if we're honest about church history and the history of mankind going all the way back to the beginning, by and large, mankind has seen incredible amounts of barbarism. When you just take into account all of the bloodshed that you read in ancient history leading up, let's say, to the Industrial Revolution, and then from there, you see what we did with communism, socialism, Stalin, Mao. When you think about Hitler and the Holocaust, when you think about World War I, World War II, all the wars that we have fought up to this point, and the many hundreds of millions who have lost their lives in the cause of war. This is why Isaiah is putting within the hope of the believer the anticipation of no more war. There's coming a time when mankind will finally put down their spears and where they'll put down their weapons, basically, and there will be universal peace. And I think postmillennialism is completely wrongheaded when they're trying to get Christians to believe that hope will be realized this side of heaven. I think the chronology of Isaiah prohibits that completely. But man, I tell you what, Micah, we've got a lot of ground to cover, but we want to show a video. But did you have another question or comment?
No,
Go ahead,
that's where I was going to take us. It's like let's get back on track and talk about the sexual immorality, the paganism, the hedonism, and then where it leads to 99.99% of the time, which is barbarism. And how are we seeing that in America today?
Oh, that's a great example. I mean, we're seeing that. We're going to see it right here in this video we're going to show. But you can see the barbaric nature of our culture unless you are willfully blind and ignorant of all things around you.
Yeah.
But when you think about the fact that we have an abortion industry that has murdered now many, many tens, if not hundreds of millions of unborn babies. When you think again about the wars that have been fought all around the world, and regardless of what your view is regarding just war theory, there are a lot of wars that are fought all around the world in which we exceed justice and we engage in radical cruelty and barbaric behavior. War is hellish, and there's no way around that. But when you look at, what's going on in America today, everything from human trafficking. I heard a statistic where, and I've shared this before, where the human trafficking epidemic is so large, so extensive, basically modern day slavery, that that sociologists and criminologists don't even know how to basically add up the numbers. The numbers are mind-bending, and they can't even get a consensus as to how many people worldwide are being trafficked. I mean, it's mind-blowing. Yeah. We're talking industrial level crimes that are being committed in those ways, human trafficking, for a number of reasons. And then even what we're seeing right now, you want to talk about barbarity? I mean, I've looked into what's going on with the trans movement, with the gender reassignment movement. And if you see what's going on at the surgical level with these people and even children, just because somebody puts on a gown and calls himself a doctor and sits in a clinic, that doesn't mean it's no less barbarous when they mutilate a child's body.
Right.
I mean, we're living in incredible barbarity, and I'm glad that Paul, I know it's very doom and gloom, and it can be perceived as, oh man, this is just horrible content. But at the same time, I'm actually quite glad that Paul gave us this section of Romans, that he went into such detail into this vice list to tell us, hey, look, this is not a joke. You want to see how dark mankind can go? I mean, right here. I mean, these issues these items that he has on the list, and they tell the whole story. But Micah, when we think about this topic today, one of the things that provoked me to do this is to show the true state of things today in America. And this video by this young lady that we're going to show, which was just a TikTok video, to me was a very sad parable of what's going on, especially in our great American cities, who have been just decimated here in the last, I don't know, what would you say, Micah? At least the last decade. They just seem, it's like someone just poured gasoline on the fire. Right. It's just, crime is off the chart.
Yeah. Yeah, no. It's, I don't want to bring political talk into this. It's kind of, but it's the mindset. I'm going to use the word. It's the demonic mindset that we have to treat mental illnesses, drug addictions, and all these things as if that's not an actual problem. That it's not
or sin,
or correct, but it's not also a demonic pressing thing. It's not or oppression thing. It's not a something that we've just allowed to just infiltrate and just go unchecked. We're changing the DSM so that it's no longer considered a mental disorder. It's now just considered whatever lifestyle that you want to live. And that has opened up the door. We always get mocked for that, the comment of it's a slippery slope, but we've opened up the door, and it has allowed really Satan to come in and kick it wide open and have these people who live on the streets that no longer are mentally stable. They're off their drugs because, or just, or any kind of other situation there. And they're wreaking havoc on just unsuspecting people who have no clue, are involved with them at all. And they're just lashing out at people like this woman that we're about to see.
Yeah. And I would say before you play this, just for folks out there, maybe a kind of parental advisory here. This video is a little bit disturbing.
Yeah.
It actually broke my heart to hear this. It's so sad, but it is indicative of what's happening. But just fair warning in terms of the content. But let's go ahead and run it.
Okay, here we go.
I'm literally shaking right now. I was just getting groceries, and I live in San Francisco, and I never really feel fully safe. If you live in San Francisco, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And I just got groceries. I'm walking out of the store, and this guy is walking past me and says, "Move, you stupid bitch," and he spits in my face, spits all over my face. And then I say, "Excuse me, did you just spit in my face?" And he says, "Move or I'll rape you." There's also people everywhere, and everyone's just walking by because they're like, I can't handle something else in San Francisco. It's always something else. I don't even know why I'm posting this. If you live in San Francisco, do you feel this way all the time? I don't feel safe, ever. I literally never feel safe. It's better when it's daylight. But nighttime, no, not leaving my house.
Yeah. Oh boy. Sadly, what this young lady is describing is just common in places like San Francisco and LA and Chicago and New York and Baltimore and places like that, where crime has gotten so radically out of control. And if you listen to that clip, you may need to go back and rewind it for our viewers, because there is a whole bunch of points that are made right there. You know, Micah, she talks about the fact that this crime happened to her, and it's completely awful what happened to her. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been spit on. I've been spit on by in an open air preaching situation. I've had a person spit on my head, and let me tell you, being spit on is very, very. It is a test of your ability to walk in the Spirit, because it's terrible. And to be spit on is one thing, but as this young lady goes on to say, there's people all around her apparently when this is happening. And then this guy goes further than that and threatens her even further just for complaining and raising the obvious and having outrage about what just happened. And even more outrageous is the fact that, according to her, no one was even there to stand up for her. It's a remarkable thing that in our culture, we're not just seeing crime on the rise, but we're seeing cowardice. And that, to me, is utterly infuriating, because we're not just dealing with criminals. We're not just rampant crime, rampant homelessness in American cities, but we're dealing with people who refuse to stand up for justice anywhere in these cities. And if you do, you run the risk of being assaulted or murdered or stabbed or shot or whatever. And it's just amazing to me, but we should not be surprised. And that's what I love about Romans, and that's what I love about other scriptures. We have a ton of scripture to explain all of this to our neighbors, to explain all of this to our politicians, to explain all of this to our leaders, to tell them, look, we have the lessons of what happens when you allow wicked men to flourish, when you allow the righteous to be oppressed and the wicked to be, promoted and to be exalted. And when wickedness is exalted in a nation, it is a reproach. And it's very sad because, I don't know, Micah, I tell you what, you have daughters, I have a daughter. When I look at this girl, it just made me think, like, of my own daughter, and just thinking about the idea that happened right there to someone's daughter.
Right.
And I'm thinking, no one was there to defend this person's daughter. And it just, if it makes you upset to watch that and makes you angry, it should. And it made my blood boil.
Well,
and it's just sad. But you say,
yeah, I'll say it like this. And sorry for the pun that's going to make it kind of okay in my head, but I could say that this could happen in the Dallas area, the Houston area, all that kind of stuff. But it's not a shock in the least bit that this comes from a city like San Francisco, in the the Californian utopia where the men of that society are too scared that their soy latte might get cold and or get spilled as they go to defend this woman, that they wouldn't even interject themselves into this to diffuse this situation. Not the most Christ-like thing to say, but to knock the guy out. Because for one thing, a society that doesn't cherish and put women on a pedestal as something to be revered in our own families and lives is not a society that is going to they're going to fall into every single one of these issues that we're seeing here. So it's not a shock at all that this happens. Yeah,
no, you're absolutely right. And, you know, where's the chivalry? Where's the courage? Right. Where are the men that are willing to stand up in a situation like that, even to their own harm?
The patriarchy's been torn down.
Yeah, that's right. And so we're reaping the whirlwind, right?
Right.
It's been 60, 70 years of constant bombardment of leftist and feminist and, you know, these, you know, elimination of the binary type concepts that have been promoted in all over Western culture now. And when you have corporate America gaslighting this to degrees that, you know, you can't even, you can't watch television for very long right now without watching a commercial or some product or some company or someone completely giving you a worldview, a philosophy, an agenda, some sort of messaging that you need to adopt, and you need to celebrate a sinful lifestyle, that you need to embrace a particular globalist mentality, that you need to embrace a liberal, feminist, left-leaning ideology, or you're gone. Or you're gone. Well, and I mean, and you know, we see the culture war raging on, and as we pointed out, Micah, there is one culture war. There's ultimately one, because it is the spirit of this age.
Yeah, and you've, as a perfect example, you've actually stopped drinking Bud Light because of this whole agenda pushing thing.
Yeah, and now there's, I guess, the Mickey Mouse thing going around too, and it's just,
I did see that. I did see that. Yes. This is great.
We won't be playing that video.
I just kept on scrolling. I didn't even stop.
You'll have to go to a different website for that. Okay. But, you know, let me just make a couple correlations here. It's not just Romans chapter 1. It's also decades later in 2 Timothy chapter 3. Let me read what Timothy says, the passage in Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 3. I don't know, you can go down to verses 1 through 5, but this is what Paul says here in Timothy. He says, but realize this, that in the last days, difficult times will come. And actually, difficult is an unfortunate translation, because the Greek word that Paul uses there is actually far more graphic and more intense. It's the same word that's used in the Gospels of the demoniac that was cutting and throwing himself around. And I've heard John Piper comment on this once and say that the word should be translated something like fierce. And so that fierce times will come. And I tell you what, look outside your window. We're living in fierce, fierce times. You think that this woman, that this video that we just saw, don't you think she would agree the world she's living in, the city that she's living in, the culture and the times and the ebb and flow that she is living in, the cultural, you know, milieu that she's in right now is fierce. It is utterly fierce. Right. She says she doesn't go outside ever. She says never. I never go outside at night. Impossible. She says during the day, a little bit, you feel a little bit safer. At night, never, ever, ever, ever. Right. I mean, think about that. I mean, this woman has basically just articulated that she lives in a prison planet. I mean, it's unbelievable. Right. And we shouldn't be surprised, because Paul goes on to say, men will be lovers of self. That's at the root of everything. Lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable. I mean, boy, that's everywhere. People refusing to reconcile in the church and outside of the church. It's he goes on, malicious gossips, without self-control, brutal, and that correlates right there. That idea of brutality, that correlates with the barbarism of Romans 1 and what we're talking about. And he says it's not just brutality. He says haters of what is good. Just like what you were talking about, Micah, that there's no, that these men, that people wouldn't stand up and defend this girl, that it's like we've lost a proper worldview when it comes to protecting women in society. Oh, well, in the Western culture that we're living in right now, that would fall under the category of hating what is good. Hating what is good is, well, we should honor women and children in society. Oh no, that's good. That's a good thing. We need to get rid of it. I mean, that's the way our society thinks now. And so he goes on, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Listen, reckless, people are reckless. There's a reckless abandon. There's no conscience in operation in these people. My wife and I, we were just watching one of these cop shows, and they showed a guy, you know, because it's not just, you know, the wacky cities of California and San Francisco. This is right here in Dallas, right down the street from my house. There was a guy who stole a U-Haul truck, and he's going 100 miles down the Dallas North Toll Road.
That's what we do, though.
Yeah. And this is broad daylight, by the way. This is like 3:00 in the afternoon, and he's ramming every car on the freeway. He must have hit 15 cars, and he's ramming them in the hope that they'll crash and slow the police down. And then if things couldn't get worse, once he gets off the road and nearly crashes into a bus he missed it by a hair. He finally ends up going over the medium of the middle of the street and ends up crashing into a tree or something. He gets out and he runs towards an airport. So it might have been left field. I don't know where he was, but and you think it's not going to get any worse. The police are chasing him, and the police officer has the body cam. And as he's chasing him, the body cam actually captures that this guy runs into a airport hangar. It's like a small municipal airport, apparently. He runs in there, turns around, and immediately starts shooting at the police officer. The police officer has to return fire and shoot him, and finally shot him, not fatally, but he shot the man and finally was able to subdue him. I mean, you want to talk about reckless abandon. I mean, zero regard for human life.
Exactly.
All because of what happens when God gives a people over to a depraved mind.
Right.
And we've seen it in redemptive history. And so, Micah, I'm going to direct people to look over to Genesis chapter 19. And of course, Genesis chapter 19 is the passage on Sodom and Gomorrah and the destruction of Sodom. But the reason I go there is because of verse 4. And verse 4 has to be forever a warning sign to every society in the world of when you talk about what is possible, what is Paul talking about there in Romans chapter 1 of what is possible for a society that descends into utter chaos, morally speaking and socially speaking. In Genesis chapter 19, we are told exactly what can happen there. Let me just read what happens here, as obviously these men are coming out to surround Lot's house because they are seeking, apparently, they are seeking to sexually assault God's angels who have taken residence within Lot's house. And to whatever degree these men were veiled or given a temporal sort of a physical ability to blend in with humanity. But it says here, before they lay down, the men of the city, and I think every one of these phrases matters. The men of the city, okay? And it says the men of Sodom. So these are the men. These are the men that run the town. These are the people in charge. These are the men that have the power to dictate the politics and the culture and the society and the justice system of a city. They surrounded the house, and here's a critical aspect of this whole text: both young and old. That should cause our jaw to drop. That it wasn't just older aged men. It wasn't just military aged men, older adult men, but it was young and old. How young, we're not told. But it seems like multiple generations are represented by these men that are bent on the most inconceivable evil. And then it says that there were people from every quarter. In other words, every aspect of the city, every aspect of life. It was the business people. It was the people that were, I don't know, it was the fast food people. It was the politicians, and it was the whoever, the officers or the police back then, or whoever it was. It was every aspect of that society was unified on the idea that it is permissible to engage in this sort of criminality and barbarity and immorality off the charts. And so I think if our society and our culture is not careful, we are descending right down the same path as Sodom and Gomorrah. And what does that tell us, Micah? God, don't think for a moment that God doesn't care about that.
God pours out his wrath.
Yeah, because what was before Genesis 19? Genesis chapter 6, verse 5 tells us what happens when society becomes so criminal, when society becomes so violent, so bloodthirsty, that God says every intent of the imagination of the heart of man was only evil continually. And what does God do in response? He judges the world. Right. He floods the world and wipes out all of mankind except for 8 souls. And that becomes a paradigm for the way the world ends the end of the age. And 2 Peter chapter 3 actually tells you exactly that the world that then was drowned underwater is now being reserved for judgment in fire. Now, there's a lot of people that will debate the interpretation of 2 Peter chapter 3, and postmillennialists will say, well, that was only talking about the destruction of the temple, and they try to use John Owen as an example of that. But what they don't understand is that John Owen goes on to talk about that passage, even though I disagree with him, that what he's saying is that is referring to the destruction of the temple and the doing away of the old covenant system, the old covenant Jewish state. But John Owen himself says that it's ultimately a template for the way the world ends. So I mean, think about that. And so when we think about cultural concerns, there's a lot in Scripture warning us and warning our culture about what's coming.
And isn't it just such a rosy picture whenever it's funny to me. It always puts a smile on my face whenever I think about reading through Revelation. The judgment and wrath that is poured out is only subsided and resolved by the return of Christ in his glory, and then the reconciliation of man to God in the eternal state.
Yeah, I think so, Micah. I think that the world gets to another.
There's your optimism.
Yeah. It gets to another. We have the ultimate optimism because we have the ultimate hope, because we hope in the ultimate Redeemer and Deliverer of God's people. But Tucker Carlson recently said,
"You're going to get canceled.
drive 500 miles in any direction in this country." You think things are getting better? You think this country's improving? You think we're heading in the right direction? I don't think so. I think what you're going to find if you drive 500 miles in any direction in this country is that you don't feel safe. Is that you don't know what kind of neighborhood you're about to drive into. And you don't want to get stranded somewhere. and have to hope on, the laurels of, somebody's goodness
Right.
to help you. I think you're going to be terrified. I think you've seen enough scary movies to know bad things happen when you're out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Don't stop at motels.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And it just illustrates, man, that we're living in very, very scary times. And so as we're thinking about our time right now, we're no longer in Greco-Roman times. We're no longer dealing with what Paul was dealing with and the early church was dealing with. We're in different times now. And so as we think about different expressions of how barbarity might emerge on the scene, Micah, I wanted us to interact with a couple of quotes, I think 3 quotes from Yuval Noah Harari. And the reason why is because as we think about barbarism, one of the things that we need to be careful about is to think that a technologically advanced humanity will somehow clean up its act.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, let's say that Elon Musk gets his wish and every one of us has a humanoid in the house. It's taking out your trash. Matter of fact, it's producing this show. I don't even need you anymore, Micah.
Fail. Actually, that's great, actually.
But one thing that's amazing is that Yuval Noah Harari, who is an advisor to the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab, he is a self-professed globalist transhumanist, and he is a historian, and now he is an enthusiast for this sort of futurist worldview, okay? And one of the things that we have to consider about the future is that as we're heading towards a more globalist, so here comes the new apologetics, guys. This is the new apologetics. This is me saying that the next 25 years, what we have to worry about is not P52, is not a textual critical dialogue about the Greek manuscripts. Now, first of all, we've done about as much, I think, as possible to be done up to this point. As many textual critics have pointed out, at this point of the game, when it comes to Greek manuscripts, we're just tinkering around with the edges. We basically have the text in front of us, and unless we come upon some incredible discovery, a Dead Sea Scroll level find, we have our textual tradition, we have our manuscript families, we have our manuscript evidence, okay? There's about 5,300 Greek manuscripts in the New Testament, and there's over 25,000 manuscripts of the Old and New combined. I think we're pretty much where we're at, and I think the heated debate today is not going to be revolving around the notion of textual criticism. And I don't think we're still going to be debating about Jehovah's Witness theology, watchtowers, and Mormon doctrine. I think the future and the new apologetics is that we are going to witness an explosion of new forces that are globalist, transhumanist, that are neo-Marxist, that are pagan, and to use the language of Peter Jones, they are oneist. And this is what's coming, man.
Yeah.
And I think the more and more our pastors and leaders and theologians and leaders and all kinds of ministries, the more and more we keep going over the same old heresies, right? Which we always will. I mean, we're never going to stop contending with that stuff. But we need more good men that are going to invest their time in understanding the new ethic and the new worldview and the new cosmology that is emerging in the 21st century. And transhumanism is right at the heart of this. And that's why I wanted to tell people that when we think about barbarity, according to leading transhumanists and sociologists and historians like Yuval Noah Harari, in his book Homo Deus, which we've talked about a lot,
Right.
Micah, on this show, right? But in his book Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow, in this book, I want to put up what Yuval Noah Harari says about what is coming and the displacement of society. Because what I'm arguing, Micah, is that we may in fact be heading to a tidal wave of barbarism in our time. And the barbarity and the kind of, man, you want to talk about hard times. What happens, Micah, when 50% of the jobs are gone? What do you think everyone just goes home and plays bingo? You think everybody just behaves themselves and starts a knitting circle or something like that? I mean,
they go plant a garden and they get their fulfillment by tomatoes, and then those tomatoes are stolen by their neighbor who doesn't do that.
They go organic. Everybody goes organic. No, what happens is that you have what Yuval Noah Harari is actually going to go on to call the useless class. So that basically what transhumanist ideas can ultimately produce is masses of useless eaters. These are the words they use. These aren't my words. This is the way they are described in globalist transhumanist literature, is that we are heading towards a real potential where masses of people are reduced to the level of what we see in sci-fi movies, with useless eaters, with masses of useless people, and that really, in a technocratic kind of age, they don't really serve a purpose.
Right. And
just listen to this first opening quote. Let's show this, Micah, so that people can see what Noah Harari is talking about here. You know, he says in the 21st century, let's see here. Here we go. I have the book here in front of me, but I can read it on the screen, but I know that I made a comment here as well. Let's see here. I'll just read it from here. In the 21st century, we might witness the creation of a massive new unworking class. Oh, there it is right there. A people devoid of any economic, political, or even artistic value. Listen to that. Who contribute nothing to the prosperity or the power and the glory of society. This, quote, useless class will not merely be unemployed, it will be unemployable. And why do you think that is, Micah? It will be unemployable because, according to these folks who are planning your future right now, AI will be the only thing employable. If you're not able to integrate AI into your business, into your decision making, into your company, into your technology, you won't be employable. But I mean, isn't that breathtaking? Remember, guys, this is a book that was endorsed by a sitting president of the United States of America, who endorsed a book that refers to people as the useless class. I mean, I think that just should take our breath away. I never get over that.
Well, knowing who that president was, it doesn't shock me because
Barack Obama.
Gosh, it was a secret. Thanks.
You're trying to keep it secret?
Yeah, I was trying to keep it secret, but
no, not going to happen.
I've gotten to the point where I just expect these things from some of our leaders, and so I'm not shocked whenever they happen, even though if you put it up against Romans 1 and the depravity and the hand of God being taken upon or taken off of us, it makes total sense, but you do have to pick up your jaw from hitting the ground.
Yeah. Well, listen, this goes from bad to worse because in the next quote, Yuval Noah Harari talks about a couple researchers from Oxford, and they published a book entitled "The Future of Employment," where they talk about the likelihood of different professions that will be completely taken over by algorithms, AI, and machines, basically, for the next 25 years. And this is what he says here. He says the algorithm developed by Frey and Osborne to do the calculations of basically the displacement in employment He says estimated that 47% of the U.S. jobs are at high risk. I mean, that's half of the jobs in the U.S. in the next 25 years will see these kinds of statistical changes. He goes on to say, for example, there is a 99% probability that by 2033, human telemarketers and insurance underwriters will lose their jobs to algorithms. They won't be needed. There's a 98% probability that the same will happen to sport referees. And then he just goes down the line of all these people that will be displaced in the near future. 97% that'll happen to cashiers, 96% to chefs, waiters, 94%. You won't need waiters. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a funny story, Micah. I took my family to Chinese food here. I don't know, at least a year ago. And it felt like one of those nights. You ever watch the Christmas Story movie? You know, the movie they play every year on over and over about the little boy and you'll shut your eye out and all of that.
Yes.
Remember when
it's not the greatest Christmas film, but yes.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's the greatest ever. But anyway,
fighting words. But anyway,
right there. Remember they go visit this Chinese restaurant.
Yeah.
Because the dogs ate the food or something. Anyway, it felt like that when we were there. Okay, maybe not as dramatic, but what was interesting about this is that the whole place was being ran by one chef and one small Chinese lady, nicest lady in the world, and the waiter was a robot. That the robot rolled the food out to us, okay, and gave us our receipt and all of that. Unbelievable. Right here in Frisco, Texas.
Huh. Wow.
And I was like, this is unbelievable. And she tells us, I love this robot. She said, I couldn't do my business with this robot. She says, I can't get humans that want to do this job anymore. Unbelievable. Yeah. You guys, this is not theoretical. This is not Pastor Emilio engaging in wild conspiracy. Okay, well, maybe a little bit, but that's okay. It makes it fun. But honestly, this is not theoretical. This is happening right now. This is happening. And all over our airports, what are you seeing now? You're seeing robotic police officers rolling around, right? And they're loaded up with cameras and algorithms and AI, and they're connected to the security system of the whole airport, yada, yada. These examples go on ad infinitum.
Yeah.
This is what's happening. Chefs, waiters, paralegal assistants, 94%. Tour guides, okay? 91%. Went to Israel. We had the best tour guide ever. A Jewish man by the name of Donnie Brody, who was just the finest tour guide for all of Israel. I mean, he's the best. Bakers, gone. Bus drivers, no more need for bus drivers when we start developing self-driving buses. 74% for bartenders, 77% that is. Archivists, 76%. Carpenters, 72%. Lifeguards, 67%, and so on. This is what's going on. Let me just read a little bit further, Micah, if I could.
Yep.
You still have that there? Okay, great. Yep. He says, there are, of course, some safe jobs. The likelihood that computer algorithms will displace archaeologists. Yeah, how many of us are archaeologists in rush hour?
Yeah.
By 2033 is only 0.7%. Unbelievable. Because their job requires highly sophisticated types of pattern recognition and doesn't produce huge profits. Hence, it is improbable that corporations or governments will make the necessary investment to automate archaeology within the next 25 years. I mean, you're going to put your hope in that?
That's a hilarious statement.
So he throws out that bone right there that you can hold on to. That if you're an archaeologist, you're safe.
Yeah.
Well, how is the archaeologist safe when all the other jobs are gone and society is deteriorating at a massive rate? I don't know. Now, let's talk a little bit about what all these unemployed people are going to do. This has become something that has been reported on a lot of different websites and things like that. But I've seen a bunch of these videos, Micah, but nobody quotes Yuval Noah Harari directly. Let me quote him, right? This is the last quote we'll interact with here. He talks about basically what will all these useless people do now? I mean, we're talking about how a society could easily go into a future technocratic and barbaric world. I mean, listen to this. He says the coming technological bonanza will probably make it feasible to feed and support these useless masses. There it is again. That's Yuval Noah Harari talking about us.
Image bearers,
without any effort from their side. In other words, it'll be like the cartoon. What's that cartoon where people just float around like vegetables and all they do is eat and entertain themselves?
Are you talking about the great Oscar-winning Wall-E?
Yeah, that's it. That's basically what he envisions. And he says, but what will keep them occupied and content? People must do something, or they go crazy. Oh, really? Thank you for telling us that, Yuval Noah Harari. What will they do all day? One answer might be drugs and computer games. He's not joking. This is not hyperbole. This is not exaggeration. Right. I have watched, because of the research I'm doing in transhumanism, I have watched hours of Yuval Noah Harari lecturing in a academic setting where he is reading these exact things to them. Okay? This is not a guy on a podcast being funny or sensational. All right? So they'll do drugs and they'll be on computers. They'll be gaming. There's your future. Unnecessary people. Listen to that language right there. Micah, if you had the ability to underline that on the screen for people, it would be great. They'll just have to do it mentally.
Yes.
Right? But they might spend time increasing amounts of time within 3D virtual reality worlds, like the metaverse, that would provide them with far more excitement and emotional engagement than the drab reality outside. There's barbarism. He has just admitted that what will be outside in the real world when you're not in VR is a world of barbarism, a drab world, just a dystopian world. Yet such a development would deal a mortal blow to the liberal belief in the sacredness of human life and of human experiences. What's so sacred about useless bums who pass their days devouring artificial experiences in La La Land?
Well, the one thing that I'm going to say right out of the gate is, even kind of with you highlighting unnecessary people, is that's not new words. That's not new phraseology for, I'm going to use the word, the left. George Bernard Shaw was saying this stuff way early in the 20th century about communism and socialism and how it would be the same things. The useless person, they just wouldn't eat. So now we're taking it to the next level, and now it's just AI is going to take over and we can all just be useless.
Yes, exactly. Correct. And so we don't want to end with just a mushroom cloud of AI. Right? And just tell everybody,
it's where it always ends.
Okay, everybody, pack your bags, go home. There's nothing, what's the point, right? Fatalism is never the answer in biblical Christianity. The biblical Christian worldview is not fatalistic, and it's not nihilistic. We do not believe that the answer is, and the answer is also not mystical, and it's not monastic. We don't retreat and go hide in a monastery somewhere, okay, like the ancient monks. We don't do that. We're not monastics. And so what is the answer? Well, the answer is always going to be the gospel. And I just stress that so much so, because I think there's so many people out there looking for answers. And I tell you what, Micah, let me tell you, my friend, I don't have a timestamp on this right now, but 2030, keep your eye on 2030 as a universal date. These globalists, they have identified 2030 as that year that they are just pushing for change. And I know there's Agenda 2030 and all of that, but I'm talking about what Ray Kurzweil calls the exponential growth in technology and what will be happening by way of robotics and by way of implantable technology the world over. And just, it's going to be so important for us as Christians to have a worldview that we can be faithful to the gospel as we respond to the barbarity of this world, and even as that barbarity expresses itself in a dystopian future, if God ordains that, because he might. He very well might. And it's going to become, in the first century, the barbarism, you could land in a coliseum as a Christian and be eaten by lions. And now we're staring into the future where you could be a Christian and you can land yourself as a Christian holding on to the Christian worldview. You can land yourself in court. You can land yourself in a digital ghetto. You can land yourself outside of the banking system. You can land yourself outside of any meaningful social cooperability with the culture, because you refuse to bow the knee and you refuse to compromise. And what that means is, oh, I'm so sorry your children can't go to school here. I'm so sorry you can't go to this doctor. I'm so sorry you can't bank at this bank. I'm so sorry you can't use that app anymore. Very quickly, those kinds of things can happen. And the answer is never going to be political rationalism. It's never going to be that, economics is going to make we're just going to stockpile silver and gold. The church is going to open up a vault in the back with silver and gold so that we can rebuild society someday, and we're going to we're all going to take on infrastructure jobs and rebuild the highways of the world. I don't think so. It's not a technological answer, Micah. It's not violent revolution, and it's not violent activism.
That's right.
It's not social justice. The kingdom of God does not consist of these things. The kingdom of God, because all of those things, Micah, wouldn't you admit, all of those things are subject to a dialectic. I mean, they react, they create something, and then another evil arises. And it goes that way, and you never get anywhere. You're right back here again.
Well, and even the things that they do create and they do make better, those things are still corruptible in the end.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. And so we need to get over this fantasy that a lot of Christians have, that we as Christians, what we have to offer ourselves is more concrete than it is. And here's why I say that, Micah. What was going on in the book of Hebrews? What was going on as Peter's writing to the Christians in the diaspora? What's going on in the prison epistles like Philippians and Thessalonians? Persecution. That's what's going on. It's going on everywhere. Persecution. Just read Hebrews chapter 10. And what does the author of Hebrews, what did the apostles give to the church as the answer to these things? They don't give them a conservative movement. They don't give them a political movement. They don't give them MAGA. They don't give them a voting registration. They gave them a heavenly hope that can never be shaken.
That's right.
And we have to be careful not to venture on blasphemy as Christians when we think that we have become so smart that we're going to politically maneuver our way out of all of this mess and hope in that, rather than to put our hope in the city that God has prepared for us. And I'm tempted to go into a whole nother segment on pilgrim theology and a heavenly worldview. But honestly, Micah, I mean, think about it, man. In the apostolic church, you're witnessing your brothers and sisters at church being dragged away to jail, dragged away to prison. Some of them are going to be martyred. And the best that the apostles can come back to you with is put your hope in heaven? Really?
Well, the question is,
That's it. And the answer to that is yes.
The question is, did they miss the mark in not telling them to run for school board? Did Peter and Paul make that mistake? Or is the fact that we're trying to build an earthly kingdom, which is exactly what the Pharisees did whenever they rejected Jesus, was they were looking for the political revolution. They were looking for the earthly kingdom to be built. How can we not reconcile? How can we not put the two and two together of that's what the postmillennial theonomists are doing today, which is putting their hope in an earthly kingdom that will then prove to God that we're ready? Because I don't see that in the Old Testament. That's not the cycle of humanity and God bringing them. Everything gets great because God institutes something. God steps away for a moment. The Israelites just mess everything up, and they don't themselves come back to God and say, hey, we went astray and we've made everything better. It's always God reintroducing himself and saying, hey guys, did you forget about me? I told you not to do this, and now you started doing this. So I don't see how that translates into 6,500 years or 6,000 years later. We're not human. Humanity has evolved beyond that to where that's not still our natural inclination. Whenever you look at the world today, I mean, I guess maybe just like all evolutions, it's going to take lots and lots of time. So since we're just in the infancy of the church, I guess we have time to figure this out.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's a historical battle. Notice that this book's subtitle is what? A Brief History of Tomorrow. Mm-hmm. What Yuval Noah Harari does there is what all of these guys seem to consistently do, that I've noticed, is they begin their books the same. They tell you the story of how the world began, going all the way to evolution. And they give you a liberal evolutionary sort of retelling of the history and progress of man, so that if they can define history, they can define the future. And that's why for us as Christians, we have to have a grasp on redemptive history, how it all began, in order to have absolute certainty about how it will end. Mm-hmm. And what our future is going to look like. So I just thought, man, this issue of the barbarity of our times is so important. We need to talk about it because we are living in barbaric times. If you have eyes to see and you don't numb yourself to sleep with whatever, TV or entertainment, right? And you really look out into the world and you see videos like that young lady from San Francisco. And Micah, like I said, we could have sat here tonight and just played video after video after video. Yeah, a dime a dozen. But it was just so illustrative of the fact. And the worst part about that video is at the very end. Do you remember? She says, "I don't even know why I'm posting this." Yeah,
I don't know.
Barbarity and fatalism lead to complete hopelessness. I mean, that's what it does. So anyway, that's our show for tonight. God bless you. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Hey, wait.
Be sure and share and subscribe and do whatever Micah tells you to do.
Do you? Well, Emilio, is there anything that you can hint to us about what we might talk about next week?
Ooh,
can you give us a little teaser? Boy. 30 seconds. Don't give me another hour. Just 30 seconds.
Oh boy, I wish I did, Micah. I've got a couple things cooking, but right now, honestly, just been busy with the Colossians study that I do on Thursdays, and so that will occupy my time for a little bit, and then once I get some clarity, I'll come back. But we'll definitely need to kind of forecast for people what's coming up for sure. But definitely, the Reformed Encyclopedia, we just need to develop that more. Talking about Reformed Trinitarianism, federalism, biblical theology, apologetics, and eschatology. We're always going to be doing something related to that. So,
in addition, Right. In addition to Emilio's doing of everything that we do with Red Grace Live, he's got plenty of stuff on his channel, as well as some Bible studies that he does with this church that you guys can check out at City View Church.
Yeah,
Frisco.
City View Church Frisco. If you just go to YouTube and just look up City View Church Frisco, you'll see our church, and we do a Thursday kind of interactive Bible study in Colossians, and then
great.
I'm actually preaching through Romans right now, which has been tremendous.
So lots here, lots on his side as well, or the church side as well. So check it all out.
Great.
Perfect.
Great.
Well,
God bless.
God bless, guys.